James Fox, who's the CEO of Dawnrunner. He's the founder as well, and he brings with him the creative power of 12 action-packed, yes, it says action-packed years in the film industry. As the principal director for Dawnrunner, he has led the company through numerous award-winning projects, including feature films, short films, commercials, music, and industrial videos all across the country. He has been recognized within the industry for his passion and determination to advance the industry through education and outreach, and has spoken at many events like NAB, the GPU Technology Conference, the Seattle International Film Festival, South by Southwest, Modern Film Fest, and others, and dedicates his time and energy on several advisory boards as well, and through partnerships with children's arts education organizations. His breaking down the barriers, quote-unquote, approach to filmmaking, creativity, and technical street smarts have labeled him a visionary for the future of visual storytelling through new methods and technical innovations. He provides strong and charismatic leadership, I agree with that, and an inexhaustible well of excitement and energy. Ladies and gentlemen, James Fox.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so that's me. Lance did a good job of introducing me, thank you. So I'm not going to go too much into that, but I work for Dawnrunner. I'm the founder and CEO. What we are is we're a small production company in San Francisco. We've been in operation for almost 8 years now. And we've got 4 full-time employees, 4 part-time employees, and we do everything. We're full service. So the idea that we're so small, yet we can manage these big projects, including a feature film that got produced completely in-house, is pretty incredible. That feature film was shot entirely on green screen on stage. The only practical elements were whatever the kids were holding and them, right? So even everything they sat on, anything, the glass, it's all fake. And we were able to do this in 6 months, start to finish. So when we started, almost 7 years ago, it's closer to 8 now, we quickly realized that growing our business would require a huge investment in non-artist support. Just looking at the different business models, we were like, we noticed that as digital cinema was coming to the forefront, we were going to quickly become an IT department instead of just filmmakers. So the idea was that we wanted to try to limit that as much as possible. Let's see. We could not take on larger jobs without adapting to new way of doing things. And that's actually what I'm going to be focusing on in my talk, is I'm not going to say that your way of doing things or your workflow is wrong and mine's right. That's not the intention of my talk. My talk is to challenge you to look at the philosophy of your workflow and to actually check your practices. The old idea, and when I was going through film school, was we do it this way because we've always done it this way. And that is very quickly breaking, as you'll see in the industry. People who are doing that and trying to stick to that method are quickly finding themselves without jobs. So we got in front of this move a little bit because we were really looking at the business plan and trying to figure out how we can stay lean and mean, like Lance was talking about. And because of that, we've been kind of riding this bleeding edge of technology. As new stuff comes out, we're adapting to it. We're experimenting with it. We're checking stuff out. We were early adopters of Red. We're doing some of these really cool pilot programs where we're testing this new technology, and we're trying to help shape this new paradigm. So, in regards to future-proofing, there's been very key innovations in the industry, right, that's kind of driving this. And you guys have been hearing a lot about technology today. I'm going to try to have a philosophical talk about technology without actually discussing the tech itself, right? So, especially in post-production, we're seeing everything kind of go to a global scale now, where you're having artists in India, you're having artists in Japan, artists in South America, all working together on the same project. I think you're going to see even more of that, and it's going to become something that is just the standard way to operate, not something that you do in a pinch. So the ability to rapidly and efficiently adapt to these new technologies is a critical factor in remaining future-proof. But if I could, I'd like to say it's less future-proofing, more future-embracing. The future is coming. You just need to accept it and go with it, run with it. It's a good thing. I think the industry at large has a really traditional sense of staring at technology like it has teeth and it's looking very hungry and ready to eat you. And that's not the case at all. It's here to help. It's here to empower. And you can do some pretty amazing things with it if you embrace it. So, yeah. You got to streamline your workflow or you risk getting left behind. Some of these big, ponderous workflows are more damaging than they are protective. So there's 3 key areas that you have to stay nimble and adaptable in, and that's equipment, applications, and your workforce, right? So I've got this kind of really awful historic workflow example, but it was the only one that I could find that was actually clean and not just scribbled out on a whiteboard, right? So you kind of have this basic workflow. This is kind of how things go in a feature film or broadcast, not so much broadcast, but feature film environment. And when this thing fills up and you no longer can meet your quotas or you're starting to see the deadlines run over, you have to outsource. You start bringing on additional post facilities, you start bringing on freelancers, and now you're subjugated to their workflows, right? You're giving them stuff and they're giving you deliverables back, which was great, only now that the workflows are becoming so technically complicated and you're getting that IT merger with our industry. This starts becoming a problem because what happens when you have 10 freelance artists working for you and all their workflows are completely different, right? You want to try to keep everything in your silo. Okay, so let's talk about this. Equipment. The old model was basically your large server-based environments, right? Centrally located, individual workstations, driven by individual artists or shifts of artists, one artist at a time at a workstation, right? Lots of power and graphic workstations, and one big central server for rendering. That's kind of the atypical model, right? And what that basically was fixed points of power. You had one workstation that had X amount of power, and you had one person driving it. That was it. If that person's working in Photoshop and building matte paintings, then they're probably not utilizing the entire power of that workstation, unless it was specifically built for a 2D matte painting artist or whatever. So then you can have the same workstations with 3D artists working on stuff, and they are just begging for more power, right? So you have this weird imbalance where you have the available power, you've paid for that power, but it's not being utilized, right? So the disadvantage to this were, large ponderous infrastructure locks you into workflow. This stuff was so expensive and so ponderous to set up that once it is set up and ready to go, that's it, that's your workflow. Changing it is too expensive, especially from a CEO or executive level. If they're not in the trenches with the artists and dealing with the problems, and I don't know if some of you artists who've been in the industry have ever dealt with this, but where you're begging for some kind of workflow change, and they're saying, no, that cost us $150,000, you're gonna use it, right? And so there you go, huge expensive investment, and it's not consumer-grade equipment, hopefully, right? So this drives an emphasis on workforce's seats. I apologize, too, for all of the text. This is more for me than it is for you. So your workforce is basically chairs that you need to fill. So you need to have enough workstations to cover your largest demand. I don't know about you guys and your workflow and your workforce and the companies you work for, but we are hardly ever at max capacity constantly, right? This last year we were pretty close, but that's also kind of one of the ways that we try to work. But when you've got 150 workstations in a big facility, you are hardly ever probably going to be at max efficiency, right? Because you're not going to have enough workstations to keep people, or you're going to have more workstations than you have people working. But you still have to cover your largest demand, right? What happens if you take on a big job and you don't have enough seats to actually get the job done? Well, that's where you go back to, now you're outsourcing. And outsourcing is probably always going to be a lose for you financially, right? Okay, so your artists need to be on site because of IT demands. You don't want artists trying to solve your IT problems, especially in a large infrastructure. So again, substantial IT support. I had a friend and colleague in San Francisco who told me that for every 3 artists, there was 1 IT support at his company. Well, the idea is, if everything's running smoothly, you don't need the IT support, right? That is never the case. So then scaling up from freelancers and additional post facilities and non-homogeneous workflows. We already kind of talked about that. So what's the fix, right? And this is really kind of the start of this challenge that I'm going to propose to you guys, is changing your view of equipment from fixed points of power that are set to dynamically allocated pools of resources, right? You are paying for X amount of power, and then you can slice it up however you need, okay? Bear with me on that. I know it sounds pretty crazy. And at the same time, be able to scale and bring in freelancers or additional workforce as needed, but have them conform to your workflow. They're still working within your structure. It's not something that you're adding on as kind of a satellite. So, raw blocks of processing power that can be utilized on demand through desktop virtualization. At the bottom, it says that this isn't a new idea. The IT industry has been doing this for years. Game development has been doing this for the last 4 or 5 years. Virtualization it's here. It's going to invade our industry. It started through things like server-based CPU stuff and GPU-based stuff like the Grid VCA. So what those things allow are for cross-utilization of existing power and no idle cycles, right? I know because I pay for these computers that I'm buying, these workstations. Nothing upsets me more than walking through the office and seeing blank screens or hard drive lights not running. My idea is have those computers running at full tilt all the time, right? So I know I'm going kind of fast, but bear with me. Remote computing as a means to expand the workforce much further than ever possible. The woes of expanding your workforce through freelancers or additional post facilities are you're literally sacrificing your control of that. And that can be troublesome. We did that kind of early on, and we quickly realized that we didn't want to do that. Bringing on freelancers is great. Expanding your workforce is absolutely necessary to expand and contract with the needs of projects. And any of you who are wanting to build your own business, somebody in the front here was wanting to, these are all things that you need to think about. Being able to dynamically expand and contract is what's going to future-proof your business. And again, that complete control leads to security boosts. It leads to all kinds of fun control that you can have if everything's within one silo. And you're conforming the artists to your workflow, which does nothing but benefit you. It also has a benefit to the artists because they get to learn multiple workflows and future-proof their ability to get work. Okay. So that moves us into applications. We kind of set the foundation with the equipment. So applications. It's funny that the word panacea came up twice in the same day, but the old model was kind of the quest for the all-encompassing, this is the tool set that I use. This is the very big, very expensive software suite that I have mastered, and I do everything in this. I'm guilty of this. I love After Effects. I would try to do my edit in After Effects if I could figure out a way to make it easier. And I eat a lot of crow for that, for having that intimate love with After Effects and I go to After Effects for everything first. Probably not the best idea. So, that you'd purchase these, and again, you're making a very large investment in these software suites. And again, that dictates and locks you into a workflow. and capabilities, right? So, disadvantages, it has a substantial upfront investment and annual upgrade fees, and things are moving so fast now in technology that by the time we've got all our plugins and everything that we had previously for the new upgrades, the betas for the next big software suite are coming out. Or we're getting announcements from some of our plugin developers that they're no longer supporting or they're no longer updating. We use kind of a lot of fringe third-party plugins that are really fun, but so a lot of your big ones are going to stick around. But again, this is your workflow. You want it to try to be as stable as possible, right? So disadvantages, run through those really quick. They're pretty straightforward. Pay-per-seat model. Scaling down is impossible. If you own 10 Creative Cloud's different, but if you own 10 versions of X software, you own those 10 versions. If you're only using 2 of them most of the time, you just wasted the money on the other 8. Version incompatibility, kind of talked about that. Freelancers create an IT nightmare when you start talking about giving them deliverables in one thing and getting something else back. And you can scream at them until you're blue in the face what to deliver, and there are times where it just won't happen that way. Plugin management becomes an additional layer of IT support, and again, your workflow dictates your system, right? Lots of CPU power required for applications and plugin alike. So how do we fix this? And again, I use the word fix very loosely. This is just kind of a philosophical conversation, something for you to think about in your workflow. You have to keep your applications nimble. And a lot of the software developers and deployment people are going to a subscription model, which is fantastic. Why is that fantastic? Because you can scale up and down as you need to, within minimums, right? You can also rent plugins. My company actually had this happen the other day where we needed a rolling shutter fix. We've never used a rolling shutter fix before, ever. I looked up the plugins, $500 for a rolling shutter plugin. Well, I don't want to spend $500 on something I'm going to use once and then shelf it. We rented it. It was like $50 because it was a minimum. We got it for like 12 days. Done. It was perfect. Fit perfectly within our nimble model, right? And everything's kind of following this demand and need paradigm, where it's like, until something becomes a demand, then you should try to avoid doing it. So the other part that's really cool about this is it allows you to use the most efficient or effective application for the project or problem. After Effects does some things great. Other software suites do other things great. I mean, we use a slew of software and applications and plugins in our office. It's very rare to see the same application up on any computer screen walking through the office. And the reason for that is because there are different plugins for different applications that work better for different things. In subscription models, you can utilize that. You can say, hey, I really need this for 7 shots. I need it for 2 weeks. I'm going to rent it. And that's perfect. So there's also the trend towards GPU computing as a more efficient, more cost-effective. It's fast, it's good, it's clean. Scale up and down with ease as far as applications. You get a homogenized workflow. If you've got the ability to expand and contract your application pool, then now the world's your oyster, right? You aren't sitting there going, well, we don't have this software. How are we going to do this? And a virtualized desktop environment allows freelancers to utilize company applications on their systems, right? So you know what kind of power those freelancers are working with. I have many, many examples afterwards at the party or whatever. If you guys want to ask me about some of the horror stories I have with other people's equipment coming into our office, please do. So the issue with this is not all applications or plugins are available in this model. And that's on us to ask for it. So workforce, the old model is determined by the largest demand. And you have to maintain peak demand and a minimum or suffer under the weight of your overhead, right? And nobody wants that. It's bad. It's bad for business. It's bad for morale. you want to try to stay ahead of that curve. So the disadvantages to this other, to this old philosophy too, is that it includes the very large IT or non-artist support to maintain the infrastructure. Kind of gone through the rest of that. So how do we fix the workforce? So the size or number of the projects you take on is no longer dictated by the size of your workforce. You can plan on a workforce that can scale dynamically based on demand. So when I go out and I look for jobs or I get offered jobs, I have to look at what we have in the pipe. And before we were working very in line, right? We were all working on the same project, we were all working as fast as we could, and we were trying to achieve that peak demand. But it's really hard when you have to take in one project at a time. So the ability to rapidly scale both up and down based on demand, utilizing these new technologies is a way that you can, allow your workforce to be a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more nimble. We already talked about that. So increase the number of artists without increasing the number of IT support. IT support is very, very important, and it's critical, and it's going to be even more so as everything moves forward. That's kind of been one of the themes for today. However, we do not want it to get out of control. I want to be able to walk through my facility and still see artists working. I don't want to just see people crawling under desks and plugging in cables and working on our server racks. I'd like to see more artists. So the idea behind the workforce dynamically scaling is that you can be a 4-person shop and still bid against larger facilities and still take on those larger jobs because you can scale as you need to. And just to demonstrate that, I have kind of a weird graphic that illustrates what our company was back in 2009 when we did our large internal feature film project. It was literally just a big line of small projects, taking on a large project, and scheduling was a nightmare. Building in that philosophy change from our desire, our passion to create this feature film, that's actually what drove this entire thing, was we need to change so we can do multiple projects all at the same time without killing ourselves. And that's where we turned into this, where we actually stopped bringing on, we would normally have 7 people in the office at any given time. Now we have like 6 or 8 and 7. So there's that. Just in closing, my challenge to you is look at the philosophy of it. Don't do things just because it's the way it's always been done, and make sure that you're leveraging the technology as it becomes available. Don't wait 10 years to adopt new technology. That's where all these issues are coming into play. Look at the game developers. They adopt the technology as soon as it comes out. New equipment hits, they are changing things over. And they're being able to very, very rapidly produce games, and we're struggling. Our industry is traditionally slow to adopt new technology because we are very much a tradition-based industry, which is great. But we need to make sure that we stay competitive. And in doing so, it's leveraging a nimble equipment base, application suites, and workforce. Thank you.
Good stuff. Thank you, James.
So what's kind of your distribution of off-site like cloud and like on-site private cloud? So public cloud versus private cloud. Are you using much public cloud for rendering or anything like that?
To date, we have not. We try to keep everything within the same. Okay, so the whole idea of rendering public cloud is very enticing, but we want to try to keep everything in-house, and that includes our rendering. That will likely change as we're in development of 3 really big projects right now, 2 TV show pilots and another feature film. So that will probably change as the workload scales. On the render side, right, we need to be able to dynamically scale that as well. So we'll probably go to a public cloud render system as well, something like Amazon or whatever.
Yeah, because it's not really appropriate for some workloads, but for other workloads, like computationally intensive workloads, it works really well.
Exactly. The Darkest Matter was kind of a pet project that we did, and we had worked probably about 3 years in its development, and we made the decision that we were going to do it internally. We weren't going to reach out for outside funding or anything. We were going to scrimp and save and stay lean so that we could do that. And we did, and we're getting ready to distribute internationally with it. It's world premiered at Seattle International Film Festival, got an A- and a B+ from their conference board, which is awesome. And it's doing really, really well. It's been requested by 9 distributors, both domestic and internationally. And for all of you, or for any of you who are freelancers or looking to start your own company, should be empowering because you can be the little engine that could just double that 100 hours a week.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you, James.
Thank you.